You've got a number of different groups that were opposed to Bashar al-Assad for different reasons, from different ethnicities, with different agendas, who have all now converged on Damascus. You've got HTS in the forefront. Do you feel optimistic?
I see a bleak future for Syria. They use religion to spread their tentacles in the Middle East.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester. That's on February the 24th. And finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
We do need a political solution to this, and that's what we're talking to regional allies about. It is a good thing that Assad is gone, a very good thing for the Syrian people. What we must also ensure as we go through this, the rejection of terrorism and violence, that civilians are protected, minorities are protected, and that can only be through a political process. That's what we're talking to allies in the region about at the moment.
So broadly a good thing then that our Prime Minister is rejecting terrorism and violence. We're off to a good start. But I guess what you're hearing from Keir Starmer is a wariness in that the liberation of Damascus, the liberation of Syria, the fall of Assad may be celebrated with a certain amount of wariness of just what is coming at us round the corner.
Yes, the king is dead. Well, he's in exile in Moscow. Long live the... Who exactly? Yeah. Are you greeting Abu Muhammad al-Jilani as a liberator, or is he still a terrorist? Because that is how he is described at the moment in the West. And how do you accommodate someone who once was seen as a terrorist, who may now be the source of national liberation for Syria? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And a little bit later on, we are going to be speaking to Bashar al-Assad's cousin, who lives in London and, it has to be said, is no big fan of his cousin who has just been deposed. That's still to come.
But first, we're going to talk more about the historic events in Syria, and after the breathlessness of the collapse of the Assad regime, which happened so quickly, as we were saying on Sunday, with Assad's soldiers and his kind of the people who work for his regime just basically giving up in the face of the onslaught from HTS, this group, this rebel group, militia group, which has led the attack on Assad and on his government. There is a question for the West, which is what to do and how to respond to a man and to an organisation, both al-Jilani and his group HTS, who are still considered by both the US government and the British government to be terrorists or part of a terrorist organisation. And that is because as recently as 2016-17, there were strong links between what is now HTS and basically Islamic State. The connection between Syria, the Syrian civil war, and Islamic State is, of course, symbiotic and deeply close, in the sense that it was the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011, which obviously led to lawlessness across much of Syria, which opened a vacuum for Islamist groups, including Islamic State, to incubate and to develop. And al-Jilani, who is now the leader of these forces and the kind of putative leader of Syria, was connected with those groups. Now, since 2016-17, in fairness, he has tried very hard to put distance between himself, Al-Qaeda and IS. He says that HTS is not part of that. He's dropped his kind of heavily conservative Islamic clothing. He's even changed his name. He has insisted that his government, if he forms a government, or his force HTS, which has basically been a quasi-government in part of the country for a long time now, is tolerant of Syrians of all religious groups, minorities, ethnicities, and is not Islamist. But of course, as far as the West is concerned, that is still an open question. We don't know what will happen next.
Yeah, and I think if there's one line that sums up Mohammed al-Jilani's worldview, it's this rather understated one, that he was appreciative of the 9/11 attacks. Now, many in the region, many were, and many of the groups that are seeking to control Syria are. But I think that gives you an insight into why the West, why Western governments are very, very concerned about what's coming at them in the form of Giuliani. He was described by somebody who was at school with him many years ago as an unremarkable boy who wore thick glasses and avoided attention, but was manipulatively intelligent and socially introverted, radicalised in the Second Intifada when he was about 17 or 18. So went from being this very studious creature to being somebody who felt he had to start giving back. And I think it's important to understand that the way into Syria has been through the economics of the place, because what they blamed Bashar al-Assad for was not just, as it were, surface level torture, imprisonment, draconian authoritarianism, but the fact he was running the country into the ground. And so when Giuliani came through, he was trying to become sort of internationally legitimate by focusing on governance in Syria, not on jihadist goals. It was all about collecting taxes, providing public services, issuing identity cards, in the same way, I guess, that, Hamas first got elected by saying, we're going to just sort out, the water pipes and the infrastructure and make it okay for you to get to and from work. And that has been, I think, the place where they've sort of insinuated themselves as a force for government rather than for attack.
Yeah, I think that it does seem that he has moved from being the jihadist of yesteryear to someone different today. And the speech that he made yesterday inside the presidential palace, where he said, we're going to speak for all Syrians and we're not going to seek to build a caliphate here, etc., etc. I think that is what the West wanted to hear. Now, how skin deep that conversion is, but he has been heavily dependent, and the two big players in this are Qatar and Turkey in particular. And Turkey have won in this power battle to get to Damascus in many ways, although there are elements of it that represent the fall of Berlin at the end of the Second World War, where you've got the sort of, Russian forces trying to get there and Western forces trying to get there for the carve up of the world as it will be.
And it may be carved up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point, right?
Because you've got a number of different groups that were opposed to Bashar al-Assad for different reasons, from different ethnicities, with different agendas, who have all now converged on Damascus and sorting out who is going to emerge at the top of the pile as the ruler of a new Syria is really hard to know.
But you could hear in Keir Starmer's response, and you could hear from Pat McFadden this morning, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and close Starmer ally and confidant, the kind of tension between what the UK government and others do next. And the UK government is not like the biggest player in this by any stretch of the imagination, but what it does will likely be part of what the EU does, and we'll probably take a cue from what the US does. But in terms of whether or not to recognise whatever government emerges, and whether or not, and he was hinting this morning that the UK government could remove HTS from the list of banned terrorist groups, given that they could well be the main component of the government. Just listen to what he was saying this morning.
This rebel group, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, known as HTS, it is a proscribed organisation here in the UK. Will you have to look at that again now?
Yeah, we will. And we'll consider that. And I think it will partly depend on what happens in terms of how that group behaves now. But I think countries around the world who prescribe this, it's not just the UK, the United States, European countries as well, I think probably will look at that now and see what's going to happen in the future. But we've not made any decisions on that over the weekend.
And how long will it take for you to make a decision?
Well, it won't take that long. I think we'll need to do it quite quickly.
And that was Pat McFadden talking to Kay Burley on Sky TV. Of course, we've been here before.
Yeah.
I mean, Nelson Mandela was once a terrorist leader of the African National Congress. Robert Mugabe was the terrorist leader of ZANU-PF.
Martin McGuinness was
Martin McGuinness was, so you are a terrorist until such times as you're in a position of government and you want to build a relationship with them.
But I mean, the quick answer to, what will the UK do now is wait.
Yeah,
wait and see what everyone else does. We are not leading on this one, I don't think.
And also, there is a tension, isn't there, about being seen. The last thing, I'm sure, one of the calculations is that the West will not want it to appear as if this is a kind of a Western stooge government.
Yes.
Because that will be deeply unhelpful for whether it's Jelani or whoever it is who sort of takes over, when you've got Russia and Iran basically waiting to say that because their stooge government has gone, it won't do much for when there is an opportunity here to reconfigure the politics of the region, it won't do much for that, or indeed for the new government's legitimacy, if there's any impression that this is some kind of Western installed government, which it isn't.
Arguably that's why the Kurdish element to this, which was backed by the US in the Civil War, didn't get further. Because everyone turned around and was like, why do we want US backers? Why do we want Syria to be run by, as a puppet of the US? So actually having anyone on your back has not been helpful. I mean, we've seen Bashar al-Assad's got, Russia behind him, and
Turkey is the big player in this. With its support of HTS, Turkey is the one that has come out with
But Turkey wants to send back 3 million refugees, right? Which are at its border. It's the biggest taker of Syrian refugees. And the first thing on Erdogan's mind, I would have thought, is stability and are you going to go home now?
Yeah, up to a point, I think that's true. But I think that Turkey is a big regional player now. Look, we're NATO allies of Turkey. So, I think that we will be tucking in behind a bit of what Ankara is doing, to be honest, about all of this, because I think that that they've got a big say in it. Qatar, again, because of its financial, economic muscle, will have a say in all of this. It is a catastrophe for Iran. I mean, Iran's bets over the course of the past year have been appalling. Hezbollah, Hamas,
and hopefully not great for Putin either. It's looking at these, air bases. Are they air bases?
There's an air base and there's a naval base.
Right, which was really important to Putin, really important to Russia in that part of the world.
And meanwhile, since we spoke yesterday, we know for sure where Assad and his family are, which is Russia. We speculated that would seem likely yesterday, but now we know for a fact that Assad has fled to Russia. What his life will be like, that he is of no further use to the Russian regime.
For how long? Chile and chilling.
Yeah, exactly. He has left the presidential palace and swapped it for who knows what, some small minor dacha somewhere in Russia, and he's definitely going to be of no use to Putin anymore. He's ended up as basically a refugee, an asylum seeker, seeking asylum in Russia from being president of Syria within the space of 24 hours.
Right. In a moment, let us speak to Bashar al-Assad's cousin, who is waiting to speak to us.
Well, joining us now is Ribal al-Assad. And what you should know about Ribal al-Assad is he is the first cousin of Bashar al-Assad. They were young boys together. They grew up in Syria together. But he is no fan, no friend of Bashar al-Assad. And what we're trying to ask, really, is how Bashar al-Assad came to be this tyrant, this dictator that he ended up as when he started off as an ophthalmologist in London.
Well, Bashar al-Assad was the spare,
to
use the royal family connection.
Yes.
He was the second in line. He was never the first in line. Bashar al-Assad's brother was the one who was going to take over from his father. Yeah. His brother dies.
Suddenly in a car accident.
Yeah, and Bashar al-Assad is suddenly catapulted from this sort of backwater life to being the ruler, the dictator, the kind of lead in Syria. Ribal al-Assad joins us now. Your cousin comes to London and he ends up being the ruler. Did he change?
He was someone who is extremely, extremely stubborn. I'm sure the Russians find out the hard way. He's someone that's not trustworthy at all. He has an issue thinking that he's smarter than anyone else because, he had this complex of being the person who was there by accident. His father was preparing my cousin Basil to take over, and then he died in a car accident in 1994. And he brought him back from London. So they didn't have time to prepare him. From 1994 to 2000, he had no military rank. He had no experience in the Ba'ath Party. So he was really catapulted. And he wanted to show that he's not there by accident. He's not there because his brother passed away. That not because his father gave him this position or makes him inherit the position. It was because of his own capacity, because of his own intellect and smart. And that again, we felt if a lot of people think, for example, that his brother Maher was they were dividing the power, or he had influence on him. Actually, even he would not listen to Maher, and Maher, was unable to make him change anything, even though he had the military power. He just was unable and unwilling to push, or to put pressure on him so he could change.
So, Ribal, how do you see the future now for Syria when you have got all these different groups converging on Damascus? You've got HTS in the forefront, looking like they could become, that al-Jilani will become the next leader of Syria. Do you feel optimistic or cautious?
No, I'm very cautious, and actually, I see a bleak future for Syria. We have something in front of us. Iran, Iran under the Shah was, we could compare it to Syria, not really under Bashar, but maybe under his father. The Shah was removed, and he was replaced with this theocratic regime, and the whole world has been trying to fight this theocratic regime since they took over. It's an expansionist regime. They use religion to spread their tentacles in the Middle East. So we should not make the mistake today. And I've read today the news that US, UK, they're reconsidering of taking them over the. We're going to do the same mistake again. As I said.
They should keep referring to it. They should keep them as a proscribed terrorist organization. Of
course, and this is what I've been calling for years. We cannot. The Syrian people. We have many smart people. We have now many millions of people who are abroad, who are very highly educated, who want to see a genuine representative democracy in Syria, a genuine, democratic constitution. People, when they rose against the Assad regime, against my cousin, they were looking west. They were looking at Western democracies. They weren't looking at a regime like in Afghanistan, the Taliban or Iran.
Ribal, it's so interesting what you're saying. Are you considering going back?
Yes, me and millions of other Syrians would like to go back to our countries. There are many, millions who would love to go and be part of rebuilding the reconstruction of our country, moving our country towards a genuine democratic Syria, a Syria that's an ally of the UK, an ally of the US, an ally of the West, and this is what we want. Nobody wants to see Syria fall into, again, the hands of another Islamist groups. We definitely don't want that. As I said, if those people, whoever they're genuine, if the West want to support any group, they first have to accept, are you ready for a new constitution where all people are, women and men are equal under the new constitution? Muslims and Christians are equal under the new constitution. Shia, Sunnis, Alawites, Druze, Ismailis are equal under the new constitution. We should not be, trying to go back and try to reverse, to go back even another 100 years. Bashar has brought the country 100 years back. We don't want to bring it another 100 or 200 years back, and we don't want to hear Jolani go on the news and say we will protect minorities. Minorities are not cattle; they are not sheep to be protected. The Constitution will protect those people.
Ribal, al-Assad, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you,
Matt.
So the Observer newspaper is the oldest Sunday title that's been in continuous production. It is also now the only what you would call small L liberal newspaper on sale on the newsstands with its distinct title, except that the Observer is being taken over by something called Tortoise Media. Now, Tortoise Media is a relatively new start-up set up by the former editor of The Times and our former boss, James Harding, which is a much more digital, online kind of exercise. So what is it doing buying a conventional piece of media real estate like The Observer? And just one other thing about it. Observer journalists and those who work for The Guardian, because it's all owned by the same group, are furious, they are up in arms, and they have been on strike and are incandescent about what the deal that has been done with the Scott Trust that owns both The Guardian and The Observer.
Yeah, last week staff went on a 48-hour strike, and they suddenly realised in the middle of this strike, or just it was coming to an end on Friday morning, after a meeting by the boards of the company who owns it, Scott Trust and the Guardian Media Group, the deal had gone through. There's a lot of very, very unhappy Observer Guardian journalists, and we're going to be speaking to one in a moment. We had expected to be talking to James Harding this morning. He couldn't make it, but we're hoping to speak to the Tortoise side of things in the days to come. But we start with Carole Cadwalladr, who has been a firebrand of a journalist on this issue and many others. And We wanted to hear from her why she's getting so upset about something which might be about to inject brand new life into her paper.
Well, we're joined now by the writer, journalist, prize-winning writer, journalist, Carole Cadwalladr. Carole, what do you make of what has happened at The Observer? Because I'm sure an awful lot of people will find it bewildering. Is The Observer carrying on? Is it still a newspaper as such? Or is it something that just exists behind a paywall? Is it a proper news organisation anymore? Can you explain it all?
No, the simple answer to that is that neither I, my colleagues, anybody really at The Guardian and Observer has any clue as to what is going on or why the organisation has got itself into such a hole that it has lost the trust of its entire workforce of journalists and an increasing number of the readers. And given that The Guardian has this very unique business model where it doesn't have a paywall in front of its journalism, it says, we do great work, we're a liberal progressive news organisation, please give us your money to support us. It just feels like a reckless and quasi-suicidal move to decide to undertake a deal in darkness to somebody who it turns out is a close friend of the CEO and refusing to look at any other possible routes for The Observer.
You said it had lost the confidence of all the journalists. I mean, James Harding, who is, the CEO of Tortoise and is going to be the kind of new head, has said that there are lots of journalists who are very excited by what he's doing that work for The Guardian and Observer.
Well, I mean, they haven't made them so. I mean, that is possible that there are some people, and certainly there's a lot of people who've got their own reasons of fed up and being frustrated with The Guardian and Observer. But I would have to say we had a meeting with the Scott Trust on Friday, and which has been referred to as a bloodbath, and extraordinary scenes between the editorship, the management and the board. And you didn't see many happy smiling faces, pleased and excited at the prospect of going to taking the 233-year-old newspaper, which is inside an organisation which has £1.3 billion to be able to spend, and instead being ported over to a financially struggling startup which has never made any money, which has no apparent business model, and has very uncertain route ahead, and where their journalism, instead of reaching millions of readers around the world, is instead going to be behind a paywall. It just doesn't feel like a very exciting prospect for anybody.
Carole, let's just break this down, because you and many of your colleagues have been on strike. It's clearly gone straight to the heart of a massive fear. And yet when you listen to James Harding, when you listen to the Tortoise deal, they're saying that this investment will lead to the creation of at least a dozen new roles for staff reporters. It will near double the editorial budget. And Tortoise has confirmed that no contract will be terminated. There will be no job losses. And it's giving The Observer what it believes is a massive injection, new lease of life in an increasingly competitive digital age. I mean, it's looking at the falling circulation figures of The Observer. Observer's not alone. Print is struggling. We know that. It's retaining The Observer in print form once a week and saying we're going to inject a whole lot more cash to give it a digital presence. Why wouldn't you embrace that?
Because he couldn't even raise that cash. So there was a 25 million target on fundraising and he hadn't raised it. And in fact, it's The Guardian who has stepped in. They found this extra 5 million down the back of the sofa on Thursday night.
So he bought 20 million to it and the Scott Trust bought 5, but you still got this injection of 25 million, haven't you?
So I guess you're in the media business, you guys. So if I said to you there was 25 million to support 130 journalists minimum, because 70 staff from The Observer plus 30 freelancers and casuals, 70 about at Tortoise, all the transition costs, you've got to build a website, you've got to hire all these foreign business and sports journalists, which currently aren't there. You've got to create a management layer. You need an ad sales team. You need I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem like an awful lot of money. And it certainly doesn't seem like an awful lot of money when you compare it to the £1.3 billion, which the Guardian is sitting on, and which it told us it wasn't able to spend a penny of that in investment in the Observer. But now it's just found this 5 million, which it's quite happy to give to Tortoise Media.
But isn't that the point then? If it wasn't going to spend any of that 1.3 billion, then what's the point? I mean, there's no point the Observer looking at that pile of cash that's not going to be spent on it.
The Observer doesn't actually exist. The Observer is a brand at this point. We've been totally integrated with The Guardian. My colleagues and I, journalism, appears on the Guardian website as Guardian journalism, which goes out around the world as Guardian journalism, beneath which there's a big box saying, please support The Guardian and give us your money. So we don't have any management. There's no commercial layer to it. There's no corporate entity. All of our contracts are with The Guardian. So apart from anything else, there's a big question here of what is The Guardian actually selling? And
well, Carole, it sounds to me like the answer to that question that you've just rhetorically raised is it gets a new lease of life because it was being unloved by The Guardian, and the Observer masthead will be once more important, although owned by Tortoise. The media is changing. The landscape is changing so fast. Every media company is trying to figure out how do we make money. Isn't this something that should be embraced, that gives the Observer a kind of a new go?
I think it's really sensible to look at all of the different options that might be available. And those include, for example, talking to the 3, 4, or is it 5 other bidders who haven't been allowed to even talk to the board, the Scott Trust board, about a potential counteroffer. And I think, as you say, it's a really difficult media landscape. You know what is really difficult? What's really difficult is building a new website and bringing web traffic to it. It's even more difficult if you're behind a paywall. The Times does it really successfully because it's been around for an awfully long time. But doing that from a standing start, the Daily Mail has just reached 100,000 subscribers, okay? Paying subscribers, and that's off traffic of 18 million. We know the Daily Mail, it's massive. What Tortoise have projected is that their aim and intention to make this financially profitable is to reach 170,000 subscribers from a completely standing start with no existing traffic, more or less. So I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound viable to us as journalists, and we are not convinced by that at all.
You think if it goes behind the paywall, people just stop reading you?
I think it's like we know we're living in a new world in which actually referrals to all websites are diminishing by the day because of AI. You know, the Google results, instead of sending people off to the news source, they're just giving you the concentrated. So I think it's incredibly difficult to set up a new impactful website which is going to attract traffic regardless at this moment in time. And so that idea that you're going to get 170,000 paying subscribers off this brand new website, where's that traffic going to come from? I mean, Tortoise, they're supposed to be a digital startup. If you look at their social media, on Twitter, they're lucky to get 1 or 2 retweets. They don't seem to understand this digital landscape in any shape or form. And again, that just doesn't give us confidence. And that's why we say we believe the only reason that Tortoise could look like an attractive so-called buyer is because it's not going to pose a competitive threat to The Guardian.
The other thing you said, which interested me, was you've given that reason, but you also said it's because the owner of Tortoise, James Harding, formerly editor of The Times, formerly head of BBC News, is mates with your editor.
I mean, it's just not a good look, is it? I think, the facts that...
But do you think that's a factor?
I question why it wasn't disclosed to all of the directors of the board or to the journalists. We only found out from journalists that actually they go on holiday together on their mutual friend, the billionaire's yacht. And the point is that we don't understand why The Guardian would enter into this secret and confidential negotiation with only Tortoise Media, why they didn't test the value. There's a process that normally happens. What normally happens if you're trying to dispose of an asset like this is that you would go out to the market, you would test the value, you would solicit bids and interest, and then you would pick that, you would shortlist that. None of that process has happened. And even though counter bidders have expressed interest and have said that they would like the chance to negotiate, the board isn't letting them because they're still in this exclusive period. And in fact, they're actually contradicting themselves. On Friday, they told a Sunday Times journalist and me that they would they would talk to other bidders. And today I had an email and they said they wouldn't, because they've got this agreement in principle. For us, the staff, and for increasing number of readers, this deal just smells bad, and we don't understand it. We don't understand the rush. We don't understand why there's a refusal to look at alternatives. We don't understand why a newspaper like The Guardian, which has written endless editorials about the need to protect workers' rights, the need to protect unions, the important role that unions play in a modern economy, why it would decide when its staff went out on this historic strike. We didn't go out recklessly. Yeah. We went out only to ask for a pause in which to look at other options. But yet, whilst we were actually out on strike, they convened this emergency meeting and signed the deal.
Carole, I just want to ask you, lastly, about the wider environment, because you wrote about it a month ago, A New Era Dawns, and you were talking about disruption, and the disruption is basically having Elon Musk at the top of the Trump government and the loudest voice in the world's media right now. And I guess you pointed in this piece to the fact that you might get your truths and your facts from behind a New York Times paywall, but if nobody else is, then it doesn't really matter. So what is the answer then to that disruption? What is the answer if you are still trying to fight mistruth and misinformation with fact?
It's interesting, this question coming from you guys, right? Because you've left a mainstream media institution to kind of set up a challenger, which is in this new space of podcasts, which is where a lot of the culture is now, which is where a lot of people get their news from, rather than from the mainstream newspapers or broadcast outlets. And I guess it's really this whole business with the Guardian Observer has really made me think about it, because I've spent 8 years investigating, exposing, trying to understand this new information ecosystem and the impact it's having on us, the impact it's having on our elections. And throughout this entire process, I have passionately defended the importance of the mainstream media and why it's so vital, why we shouldn't disaggregate journalism, why we need to have these well-funded, fact-checked, rigorous, institutions that are going to be there as upholders of fact-based journalism evidence. And this has really caused a crisis for me, actually, because we can see what is coming down the line in America. We know that journalists are going to be under attack like they've never been before. But what I worry about is that these institutions are not going to be up to the job. And I see, for example, in my own organisation here, the fact that they could do whatever you think of this deal, whatever you think of it, to go into it without a proper consultation with the journalists and with the readers, who are your real financial stakeholders, just shows a tone deafness and a sort of ignorance about the actual media landscape that we're in that this sort of the old-fashioned idea that you can just sort of dictate things from the top and people will accept this doesn't exist anymore. And that is why I find what's going on with The Guardian so troubling, because I think there are the seeds of its own impending implosion here. And that's why I think they really need to radically... that the Scott Trust, I would argue, is not a fit protector of this valued news organisation in an age in which there has been a complete reversal in this news and information system, and trust in the media is plummeting. And increasingly, I think it probably is, like I say, challenger brands like yourself who are trying to bring those values of the mainstream into these new media spaces, are increasingly important going forward.
So I have two candidates for our newsagent's tweet of the day.
Oh, is this a new section we've got?
Well, I think it could be. I mean, let's try it out. So I've got two candidates for it. One is from Kate Hoey. Remember her? Used to be the Labour MP for Vauxhall for many years. Has gone on a bit of a journey, I think it's fair to say, politically over that time.
Quite a long journey.
Very long journey. So obviously we've been talking about the historic seismic events in Syria, and we've been talking about obviously seeing the jubilation of people in Syria and, you know, these momentous events. Kate's first reaction, or her reaction on her tweet, which has got most traction anyway, is, well, presumably all those genuine asylum seekers in the UK from Syria who are fleeing the Assad regime will be on the first plane back home. So that's her contribution for that. I mean, of course, Kate, if you want to go and do a recce, see what Syria's like first, just before everyone else goes out, well, that's if you want to enjoy that, then that's fine. But we've also got another one, second candidate, and that is from our old friend Lee Anderson, of course, 1/5 of the Reform Parliamentary Party. And this is actually a response to another tweet from someone called Jessica M on Twitter, who says, women deal with periods, pregnancy and menopause. What do men have to deal with? And Lee's response was, try the Battle of the Somme.
His role was incredible in the First World War.
Yeah, true.
Lest we forget Lee.
I do think on some level Lee genuinely does think that he was at the Somme, or at least kind of in the First World War in some way.
No, I think you cannot be a Reform MP unless you refer to either one or other of the great wars in every single tweet you put out.
Where's it go back? Agincourt?
You wouldn't even suggest I was that old.
Poitiers? No.
The remarkable thing is that Lee Anderson is blessed, like many of us, to be part of that generation that haven't seen war. So to suggest that he has to see people like me have to go through things like the Somme, you don't. You haven't had to. You've never seen military service. Honestly.
No, it is not something that many men in this country have actually had to deal with for a long time, as opposed to all women, of course, or who have periods. But hey, you know, look,
and also,
6 to 1, half a dozen the other, eh, Lee?
And also, women see active service now. So
that is true. That is true. Anyway, do you have a winner? Do you have a preference? Do you prefer?
Lee Anderson.
Lee, you are the inaugural winner of our newsagent tweet of the day.
You
I'm
might
sure
be the
you're
inaugural and the final winner, depending on how often this comes back.
If you want the judges' comments on why, Kate Hoey's utterly predictable, Lee Anderson's utterly ridiculous.
And predictable. So he steals out on both categories.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.